Hey class, I wanted to create a video to briefly go over some of the topics that we covered in the past weeks. Hopefully this will help you answer some of the questions you may have, or provide you some additional examples to help you understand some of the concepts. First, let's review some of the common syntax that we learned. In the previous week we learned about some mathematic functions such as add, subtract, divide, and multiply, and you may have not heard of this one, but we also learned about something called modulus. The first four should be pretty similar, but modulus may be new. Modulus is what we use when we want to get the remainder of something that we divide. For example, if we were to want to do 5 modulus 2, 5 modulus 2 would then say, let's take 5 and divide it by 2. But instead of giving us the overall value, give us what's remaining. And in this case, that would be 1. Alternatively, we could also do a number that divides. We could do 4 modulus 2, and that would return 0, because 2 goes into 4 2 times, and there is no remainder. To move along, we also learned about strings, or lists of characters, and that they can be described with quotes. So this is a string. We also have learned that they can be double quotes. This is also a string. And that is how we can determine, strings that we want to communicate with people. So sentences, different things we want to send across. The best way to keep track of this data is by using something called variables. Because right now, if we were to run this code, nothing would happen. We get nothing out. And it also wouldn't store it anywhere. And this isn't super helpful because sometimes we want to use data over and over again. And variables are the best way that we can store data that we're trying to reuse. So in this case, if we were to do something like x equals 5, we have this variable called x, which has the value of 5 in it. Now, variables can be named anything. It doesn't have to be, there really aren't a whole lot of rules around it, except that it has to not be, it can't be in a string, so you can't have quotes in it. And you also can't have subtraction symbols in it, or basically any symbols. But as long as you have multiple words, you can put them together with multiple words. You can put them together with underscores, or you can put them together in other ways. But generally, you can put things together like that, and you could say that this is a multiple word string. And then anytime we use multiple word, we'll have the contents, which are multiple word strings. Now, one of the things that you run into with variables is that it gets really easy to, as we're writing a program, use variables that are short because they're faster to write. The problem is if we did something like this, x equals 5 and y equals 10.2, oops, excuse that. It's just my program that's trying to autocomplete that for me. The difference is that x is 5 and y is 10.2, but what are those things really? It makes it a little bit difficult. Can't really understand the meaning behind it. So I'm just going to write a little quick note here with a comment. It's difficult to understand the meaning behind it. What might be easier is if we were to do something like this. Height equals 5 and width equals 10.2. Again. And so now we have this thing, and anytime we look at that, okay, we know that the height is what we're talking about in this case. So it's a little bit easier to understand and describe. Now that we've kind of gone over some of the basic concepts of the syntax within Python, it's really nice that we have that data, but it doesn't do us much good if it just stays inside of our application. We need a way to get it back. One such way is through using the print statement, which we also learned about. And the print statement can be used in a couple of different ways. So you can do print with a space, and then you can put a string to it, or you can do a variable like height. And this is one way that you can do that. Another way is that you can use double quotes, as we talked about before with strings. And finally, you can also use what's known as the function syntax. And this is the one that I prefer because this actually leads you into Python 3, which you'll probably be using later on in life. So these are the different ways that you can use print, and print is a great way to get data from your application back out of the program. So if we were to actually run this, and you're upset because I've got Python settings on for Python 3, but if I were to go ahead and run this, you would see that I get string out, 5, string, and string. And the only thing that we see here are these. All the rest of this is just part of the application that doesn't get out. Print is a great way for us to see data that comes back out. When we think about applications or programming that we use, though, it doesn't take long to start thinking about, well, how do I get data in to the application? Because that helps make our applications flexible. We need to provide a way for users to set variables. We need to provide a way for users to set conditions for them to go through. So in Python, the way that we do that, and I think that you guys have seen this in some of the previous videos, is that we have two different things. We have input and raw input. Now, it may be a little bit confusing. Okay, well, why do we have two of them? Well, they decided that they wanted to have one way to try to guess what the data type is that we're storing, and they wanted to have a way to just get anything. You can use raw input for either, but input is only for numbers. So if we wanted to store, let's go back to the concept of data storage, things that are important. If we were to ask somebody about themselves and say, what is your age? We could do something like input. Now, input is a little bit like print in the fact that you can pass it something. And what that thing that you pass it to gets printed out to the user kind of as a prompt. So we're going to say, what is your age? Now, when we run this application, let's save it real quick. We run this application. You come out here and you can see that it stops after it has printed out, what is your age? What this will do then is it allows the user, or in this case myself, to come here and say, I'm going to enter in 50 for the name of Bob is 50. You put in 50, and okay, well, it didn't print anything. Well, that's because we haven't printed anything out. But we did get that data, and we did store it in age. And that was what was so great about that. And so then we're going to say, okay, well, let's also get their name, because this is also really important. So we'll do raw input. What is your name? And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a little print statement here. We're going to say, your name is, we can do %s, and I'll get into this in just a second, but your name is %s, and your age is %d. And then we'll go ahead and pass these in here, and we'll run this application. So all of a sudden, oh, look at that, we're back where we are with age. So we say, okay, 50, and your name is Bob. Now if you look, I now have this print statement which then takes the data that we gathered from the user and it puts it together and allows us to use it to give them information back. So your name is Bob and your age is 50. And this is how we utilize inputs, is that we can pass it variables, we can pass some strings, and in my next video we'll go over how this formatting works, because I'm sure that a couple of you have questions about, oh, what is the %s, what is the %d, and if you haven't gone through the rest of the training for this week yet, you may be confused as to how that works. Lastly, one thing that I wanted to cover were functions. Functions are a way that we can take some code and make it reusable over and over again. And this is really helpful because sometimes when we write an application, we want to be able to write something once and reuse it without having to do it over and over again. So it's really easy to do something like age equals 5 plus 5, and that means that the age is 10, right? Okay, well, that's great. Well, what if we want to be able to do this application that adds data together more than once, but you can change the data that's passed to it? Well, with that, we use a keyword called def, which means define. It's going to define a function. And so what I'm going to call this is add numbers. And right now, I'm just going to have it do nothing. So I'm just going to print number is, and not going to have it do anything other than that. So right now, what this function does, as we can see, is all it does is print some data, which is number is. That's all it does. So we'll come down here, and because it's not being called anywhere, and I'll explain calling in a second, Go ahead and run this application. You'll see that it works pretty much the same, and then this function isn't used. But we've defined it. So in order to use a function that we've named, we take this information right here, this add numbers, and we call it add numbers. And we do that by just taking this part after def and making sure we have these parentheses. And because we're not adding any parameters to the definition, it's just going to call it. So I'll go ahead and save it. We'll run it again. Oh, and I just made a mistake there. 30 and Bob. And you'll see that it prints out number is, just like we expect it to. And I'm also going to come up here and just go ahead and get rid of these input lines. I'm just going to comment them out for now, because I don't want to have to put that in every time I'm running this. But functions are very useful because you can have them do something without any input, or we can have them also take input. So I can come here and I can say number A and number B, and I can come in here and say total equals number A plus number B. And there's a keyword with functions called return. And what return does is it says, once I'm finished, I've got some value that I want to send back to whoever called me. So we're going to call total as what we want to return. So now I can say my age equals add numbers, and we're going to pass in 20 and 30 for Bob in this case. And we're going to print my age. We're just going to see what happens here. You'll notice that you still get the print out statements from up above, but you'll also see that when we call my age down here in the print statement, that it has the value of this function. And this function takes two numbers. So we'll hit here and say, okay, we're going to pass in 20, which goes to number A, pass in 30, which goes to number B. And down here we say, okay, we want to take a variable, call it total, and we're going to store number A plus number B. Once we have this finished, then we're going to say return this value, which means, okay, we're done here. Go back to where I was called, take that value of total, and we're going to have that returned, which will be stored in my age. And then here, because the variable has been set for my age, it has the contents of this function. Now, this is really, really useful, and you're going to find yourself using it a lot because while this is something that, okay, yeah, adding numbers is fairly simple, these functions can be really, really complicated. And we'll get into that further as we learn more about the concepts within Python of conditional statements and looping and stuff like that later on. But with this, it allows us to really expand what we can do with our program, because we can start making our program very modular. You can have separate functions, which you can call multiple times, and they can contain different data, but still provide you the output that you would expect. Because again, if I go here and say your age equals add numbers, and I pass in 15 and 15, and I print that out, you'll notice that when I run the program, it says 30 instead of 50. Both of these are calling add number, but it allows you to pass in any set of numbers that you want. You can have almost as many of these as you want as well. You could have 3, you could have 1, you can have none. And they're very flexible, and they allow you to really change things and expand your application beyond what it can currently do. I hope this has been helpful. If there are any questions about some of the stuff that we've covered, please feel free to reach out to me and ask me about it. I'll do my best to explain it a little bit more. Again, in the next video, I'm going to go over the concepts from this week about strings, proper formatting, escaping, how to access the array of characters, because that's what a string is. It's a list of characters, and you can access those, and I'll get into that a little bit as well. And then we'll also learn about some of the string functions, how to do something called concatenation, which is when you take two sets of strings and you combine them together. And then again, we'll go over the string formatting, which we were talking about earlier, as well as some information about something called libraries. Again, I hope this was helpful. Let me know if there's any way that I can help clarify. But thank you again for all of your hard work. Keep it up. You're doing great.